The echoes of Ward 13. The city called it St. Dymphna Medical Center, a towering, glass-and-steel monument to modern medicine in the heart of a metropolis that never slept. Its emergency room lights burned all night. Ambulances came and went in a steady rhythm. To outsiders, it was just another hospital, sterile, efficient, saving lives. But to those who worked inside, there was a shadow beneath the fluorescent glow, a feeling that something old, forgotten, and deeply wrong pulsed beneath the surface. Dr. Adrian Malik felt it most during the night shifts. He'd been a psychiatrist at St. Dymphna for 9 years, and in that time he'd seen minds unravel in every way imaginable. But lately, something else had started gnawing at the edges of his thoughts, not the suffering of his patients, but the hospital itself. It was as if the building had a pulse, a breath. He would catch himself listening for it in the silence between monitors, and when the silence stretched too long, he thought he could hear whispers in the vents. It wasn't just him. There was Dr. Clara Vasquez, the sharp, skeptical neurologist, Dr. Evan Roth, the young and ambitious resident, Dr. Shahana Iyer, a sleep specialist with a quiet, haunted past, and Dr. Jonah Lee, the oldest among them, a surgeon who had been at St. Dymphna since before any of them were born. Together, they were part of a small, interdisciplinary task force assembled to investigate a strange uptick in patient psychosis. The cases had started 6 months ago, scattered, isolated. Then they grew. By August, it was a flood. Patients admitted for routine procedures began reporting visions. Others, with no prior mental health history, developed rapid-onset paranoia, auditory hallucinations, or violent episodes. Most disturbing were the ones who described the same thing, a presence in the walls. They all spoke of it differently: a woman's voice, a figure in the corner, a shadow crawling along the ceiling, but the core was the same. Something was watching them. Initially, the group chalked it up to coincidence, shared delusion, perhaps even environmental causes. But then the doctors themselves started feeling it. It began innocuously. Adrian started forgetting things, whole conversations, pages of patient notes. Shahana dreamed of patients she'd never met. Evan swore he saw someone standing behind him in a darkened corridor, but when he turned, there was no one. Clara's hands began trembling during procedures. Jonah, the unshakable veteran, began locking his office door from the inside during rounds. And then there was Ward 13. Officially, Ward 13 didn't exist. It had been decommissioned decades ago, sealed off after a fire gutted part of the West Wing. But during a routine systems audit, Evan found references to 13B still buried in the hospital's active patient records, an anomaly that shouldn't exist. They decided to investigate. It was 2:17 a.m. when the 5 of them pried open the rusted steel doors at the end of the west corridor. The hallway beyond was choked with dust and silence, abandoned for 30 years. Paint peeled like old scabs from the walls. A faint smell, antiseptic and something else, something rotten, hung in the air. "This is insane," Clara muttered, her voice shaking despite herself. "We shouldn't even be down here." But they pressed on. Room by room, they found remnants of another era: rusted bed frames, broken monitors, ancient medical records. But deeper in, things got stranger. Entire rooms were stripped bare, walls scraped clean as if something had been removed deliberately. In one, they found restraints bolted into the floor. In another, a two-way mirror shattered from the inside. And in the last room at the end of the corridor, a metal placard still clung to the wall. "Ward 13B, Experimental Psychiatric Unit." "What the hell?" Adrian whispered. The deeper they dug, the darker the truth became. The hospital's archives, heavily redacted and fragmented, revealed that Ward 13B had been part of an unethical psychiatric research program in the 1970s. Patients, many of them involuntarily committed, had been subjected to extreme sensory deprivation, induced hallucinations, and surgical procedures designed to treat psychosis. Most never left. The official records listed them as transferred. In reality, they were buried under the hospital's foundations. It should have ended there. But it didn't. Within days of their discovery, the 5 doctors began to spiral. Evan stopped sleeping. He wandered the halls at night, murmuring to himself. Clara started hallucinating patients from the 1970s, faces she had never seen, but somehow recognized. Shahana developed an obsession with the vents, convinced something was crawling through them. Jonah began hearing surgical instructions whispered in his ear while operating. And Adrian, once the most stable, started losing chunks of time entirely. Hours gone. Conversations forgotten. He woke up one night in Ward 13B, barefoot and trembling, with no memory of how he got there. Something was bleeding through. At first, they believed it was a shared psychosis, folie à plaisir, born of proximity, stress, and obsession. But the evidence defied explanation. Electronic devices malfunctioned only in Ward 13. Temperature drops were recorded on sensors. Security footage showed empty halls one frame and shadowed figures the next. A patient in another ward began speaking in the voice of a doctor who had died in the 1970s, reciting surgical notes verbatim. The line between past and present blurred. Each of them began keeping journals, a desperate attempt to anchor themselves. In them, their handwriting became erratic, looping, unfamiliar. Sentences they didn't remember writing appeared. It's still here. We never stopped. They're watching. Adrian's journal contained pages written in a language he didn't know. Shahana's was filled with diagrams of human brains that weren't anatomically possible. And then, one by one, they broke. Evan was the first. He vanished during a night shift. Security found him 3 floors below the psychiatric unit, standing in an empty operating theater, his hands covered in someone else's blood. He had no memory of whose. Clara checked herself into the psychiatric ward voluntarily after waking to find dozens of faces drawn on her office walls. All staring, all identical. Shahana disappeared into the ventilation system, literally. They found her 2 days later in a crawl space barely large enough to crawl through, muttering about the ones who never left. Only Jonah and Adrian remained. Jonah, older and steadier, tried to piece the puzzle together. He combed through historical records, witness statements, anything that could explain the phenomenon. And slowly, a horrifying pattern emerged. The experiments of Ward 13B had not just broken minds. They had fractured reality itself. Years of sensory deprivation, induced psychosis, and trauma had created a psychic echo, a kind of malignant consciousness imprinted into the very walls. It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't haunting. It was something worse, a psychological resonance, a disease of thought and memory that infected anyone who got too close. And St. Dymphna was built on it. In the final weeks, Jonah tried to convince Adrian to leave. This place isn't cursed, he whispered one night, eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. It's contaminated, and we're infected. But Adrian couldn't leave. Not yet. He needed to know who he was talking to, because by then, he was speaking to someone. A voice, calm, rational, familiar, that guided him through his days. It whispered diagnoses, explained patients' symptoms, even told him where to stand to avoid security cameras. Sometimes it sounded like his own. Sometimes it sounded like someone else entirely. And sometimes it called him doctor. The last entry in Adrian's journal was dated October 13th. I think I understand now. We are not haunted by them. We are them. Every thought, every memory, every choice we make is part of the echo. Ward 13B never ended. It's just wearing new names, new faces. We didn't discover it. It discovered us. And it's still working. Still experimenting. That night, Jonah vanished. His badge was found in Ward 13B, next to a mirror that hadn't been there before. Adrian was found 3 days later, sitting calmly at the nurse's station, wearing an ID badge from 1974. The photo wasn't his. The hospital board launched an internal investigation. They shut down the West Wing. They erased all mention of Ward 13 from public records. The official story blamed stress, shared delusion, burnout, a tragic series of mental breakdowns among staff. St. Dymphna remained open. Patients still came. Doctors still treated them. And the whispers in the vents never stopped. Sometimes, new staff say they feel like someone's watching them in the West Corridor. Sometimes, a patient swears their doctor was a man who died decades ago. Sometimes, late at night, an empty operating theater lights up on its own. And if you listen closely, beneath the hum of the hospital, you can still hear the voice that started it all. Patient, clinical, precise, repeating the same words over and over.